Hey, I'm Warren Sprouse. This is the Bible Forum. We're glad you're here. We're here every Sunday night from 8 to 10 p.m. We're going to be talking a little bit about Noah's flood. Do you know what really happened? Do you care? The Bible appears to indicate that several of the approaching end times events will be similar to those in Noah's day. Matthew chapter 24, Jesus said, it was in the days of Noah, so will it be when the Son of Man comes. Now, perhaps the most significant event in Noah's day was that which caused the destruction of the entire world by water, commonly referred to as Noah's flood, although Noah had nothing to do with it. The Bible tells us that in the days of Noah it rained 40 days and nights, and by some miracle, this was able to flood the entire earth, covering the highest mountains, whereas scientific research claims that the math just doesn't add up, making this event nothing more than an ancient myth. And the scientists scoff. There was not enough water. There can't possibly be enough water fall in 40 days to cover one mountain, let alone all the mountains of the world. Of course, we don't know how many mountains there were, and we don't know how high they were, but it doesn't matter. Now, the truth is that the Bible clearly states that rain was not the primary reason for flooding. In fact, the scripture states, Genesis chapter 7, that on that day all the fountains of the great deep burst open. This makes the flood a matter of scientific fact. How is it possible that the fountains of the great deep would burst open? But it makes that event the direct cause, something that science knows a lot about. It's called a geographical pole shift. And they know that it occurred, and that it occurred thousands of years ago. They may put it at tens of thousands of years ago. But geographic shifts are ones in which the entire planet is suddenly and dramatically moved from its axis, causing untold devastation on the Earth's surface. Now, the Old Testament doesn't use modern-day terms like pole shifts when it describes a great flood. Nobody would know what you were talking about. But it does provide enough detail about the earth before, during, and after the event to demonstrate to us that there was an axial pole shift. Genesis chapter 2, verse 6, we read how that in the early days of man it never rained upon the earth, that the entire surface was watered from the mist that rose from it. During this period, before the flood, there were no seasons, there were no storms. The entire planet would have existed at a temperate equilibrium with tropical vegetation, including at places that we now call our North and South Pole. Is that possible? Well, in fact, petrified tropical trees have been discovered under the ice in Antarctica, proving that possibility. Now, scientifically, the only way to achieve this temperate paradise would be if the geographic axis of the Earth was parallel to that of the sun, or in other words, 0 degrees. It is not that today, but science knows that it was. And Genesis clearly states that after the flood, for the first time, there was a rainbow. Noah saw it in the sky, Genesis chapter 9, which was now only possible because of the precipitation that fell from the heavens, causing that light refraction that we call the rainbow. Roy G. Biv, remember that in school? Red, orange, yellow, blue, indigo, and violet. Colors of the rainbow. Today, science knows that the Earth's axis sits at a 23.5 degree angle. which creates frozen poles, creates seasons, rains, violent storms, uneven heating and freezing, all sorts of weather patterns around the globe. So we go back to these fountains of the deep explained in Genesis and how it was able to flood an entire planet in such a short period of time. Well, quite simply, the fountains of the deep were the oceans themselves, which makes up 71% of the Earth's surface. And it no doubt would have been water that was trapped beneath the mantle. Basic physics models show how the flood could have caused, or could have been caused, by a shift in centripetal force and angular momentum exerted upon the oceans, resulting in an axial pole shift, causing them to overflow their banks during the days, the weeks the pole shift was occurring. It wouldn't have happened in 10 seconds. It would have taken days, perhaps weeks. Shifting the earth, stabilizing it in a new axial position. Now, if it were just talking about the oceans of the earth, they have an average depth of 2.28 miles, whereas Earth's dry land has an average height of less than a half a mile. So covering the Earth's surface with water is no problem. But have you ever heard of the Atlantic Ridge? If you have a computer, you can go in your phone to Google Earth, and you can toggle out over the Atlantic Ocean. You'll see it. There is a ridge that runs north and south up the whole length of the Atlantic. Some believe that it goes all the way around the globe. But at the very least, it shows that the earth opened up. Huge mountain crevice, spewing all sorts of dust, dirt, trash, junk, whatever, into the atmosphere. And every scientist knows that if it's to rain, there has to be dirt in the atmosphere for the water to grab hold of, and so forth and so on. So you have the Bible explaining how dirt was thrown up into the atmosphere and then the water came down. You actually have all this shifting that's going on, all the plates moving in ways they'd never moved before, destroying all life that has breath. We're told the waters covered the world for 150 days before they began to recede. And during this time, most of the evidence for the existence of populations on the planet, including cities, roads, everything would have been virtually erased. Sites such as the Grand Canyon in the United States could have been formed by massive amounts of rushing water in a matter of weeks or months, no more than a few years, rather than the millions of years geologists believe it would have taken. And that's not just a preacher believing the Bible over science. Have you ever heard of the Little Grand Canyon? Mount St. Helens blew up. What was it, a third of the mountain crashed down into the valley. And in that valley there was a river. It stopped the river. It took several months for that river to carve out another path through that debris. They now call that the Little Grand Canyon because it looks just like the Grand Canyon. Water coursing through soft dirt and mud and then hardening. What do you call mud that gets hard? We call it rock. We call it sandstone, don't we? What's the Grand Canyon made from? This also explains why fossilized sea life and coral are found throughout the world's deserts, as well as on the top of our highest mountain ranges. It explains continents, mountain ranges that run north and south. A monstrous ice age that followed with all that water on the planet. It cooled the planet tremendously, followed by a warming trend that brought not only an increase in the Earth's population and prosperity due to farming and all the rest, but it also brought the Black Death Tens of thousands of people died. And then following that moderate temperature came a little ice age, which we were just coming out of during the Revolutionary War. You remember Valley Forge? We were just coming out of a little ice age. Now, scientists look at this and say that would have been the ebb and flow over hundreds, if not thousands of years, if there was a global flood that today would be trending back toward a colder climate. It's just natural phenomena, given the water, the new axis, and all the rest of it. But more than this, when we read the Bible about its end time scenarios, what do we see? It features terrific global phenomena. A third of all vegetation is destroyed. A third or more of global population is killed off. A third of all sea life dies. A third of all the land mass is gone. What has the power to do that? Well, we know that God does. But now we know that He is willing to use natural forces to effect the flood. Will He do that again? Some scientists say yes. Have you ever heard of a coronal mass ejection? They call them CMEs. It is an explosion on the sun that shoots out a tremendous blast of energy. It kills everything in its path. Revelation chapter 8 verse 7 tells us about a third of the earth being burnt up, along with a third of the trees and the grass. Based on the wording of the text, many theologians, physicists claim that what is being described could be the occurrence of a CME, sun power hitting the earth. The surface of the sun consists of dense, superheated plasma. Think of the sun as a great ball of liquid fire burning at around 10,000 degrees Fahrenheit. Literally fire through and through, like a lake of fire or a lake on fire. CMEs are always being emitted from the sun. But if a large one, on an unprecedented scale, should strike the earth, this dense superheated plasma would push away part of the Earth's atmosphere. That would expose the stratosphere to the minus 150 degree Fahrenheit temperature of space, which would instantly crystallize all moisture within the stratosphere. As the CME pressure wave continues to push through the atmosphere, it would compress the ice crystals into hail balls. That's exactly what is being described in the text of Revelation. John talks about that before a third of the earth was burnt up, quote, there came hail and fire, seemingly contradicting states of matter. As the CME continues into the stratosphere, it would then vaporize all the planes, the birds, the flying insects, which would also match the next description we get from John, that hail and fire is mixed with blood. The CME would then continue to the surface of the earth, where John clearly describes that all this hail, all this fire and blood is then, quote, cast upon the earth, burning up a third of the trees and the grass. This description is specific. It's intended to be chronological in order, describing exactly what one would expect if an unprecedented CME did indeed strike the earth. Scoffs, if you will, skeptics will do sorts of things. It's chalked up to biblical sensationalism. Well, recently, governments all over the world have built over 1,000 doomsday seed vaults to ensure the survival of the human race. The largest that we know of is the Norwegian vault on the island of Spitsbergen in the Arctic Circle. In addition, governments have begun building massive underground bunkers and small underground cities carved within the bedrock of mountains for their leadership. We heard about our government reopening one of their post-World War II Cold War bunkers. Remember that? I can't remember the name of the mountain, but that's what they call it. It's a mountain out west, and they're opening it up and restocking it, but they won't tell us why. The Bible also talks about the unprecedented Christian and Jewish persecution. We're starting to watch that now. There's also a prophesied convergence of religion, economics, leadership, which is clearly illustrated in our one world financial system with its microchips and biochips. Right now, we clearly see these new systems and ideologies merging, and most surmise that a one world financial system will emerge as nations and economies become more unstable. But the most frightening signs might be the ones hiding in plain sight. First, unknowing to most, the Earth's magnetic field, which normally protects us from high energy particle emissions from the sun, is collapsing. With a reduced magnetic field, solar radiation and CMEs will now have a greater impact on the Earth than ever before. Nothing to block it, slow it down. In fact, the European Space Agency recently launched a satellite array that monitors solar activity and the impact it has upon the Earth. During the first 6 months of operation, it was revealed that the Earth's magnetic field was not only indeed collapsing, but it was happening 10 times faster than researchers first realized. In addition, recent discoveries by astrophysicists in Japan have revealed that our sun is in fact capable of producing what is now being called a superflare, which is 20 to 1,000 times more powerful than any flare witnessed in our modern age. They're referring to a CME that would be substantially larger than the one which occurred in the Carrington event in 1859. The superflare being described by researchers would be so powerful, with the Earth having a weakened magnetic field, it could truly penetrate the stratosphere, causing the events described in John in the book of the Revelation. But the Lord has already warned us that all that's coming. We are told to look for signs for the end of our age, and it appears that the Lord has already warned us that event described by John is indeed coming soon. During July of 2012, a massive CME ejected from the sun, capable of everything I've just described to you, crossed Earth's orbital path, missing us by only 1 week. This particular CME was unprecedented in size, classified as an X class. And if the flare would have erupted just 1 week earlier, it would have hit the Earth square on. This CME blast was so massive that NASA referred to it as the solar superstorm of 2012. And they believe it would have knocked our civilization back to the 18th century. It would have created panic, war, starvation, and disease. Where do you find those in the Bible? This near miss was so shocking to various unaware agencies, they kept the event secret from the public for 1.5 years before finally revealing it to the media at a space summit. Following Europe's early flare detection system, NASA has also recently launched their own CME detection. Satellites named Stereo, which will give the U.S. government a 12 to 24-hour notice in case of an approaching catastrophic solar flare. What's it all mean? Well, it just means we're closer than we thought. It also means the Bible is spot on. So what are your priorities? Given the fact that the time is clearly shortened, How are you going to spend your time, your money? Where are you going to put it? Is there any urgency in getting the Word of God out? Or can we just sit back and say, I've done everything I can, the next generation will have to deal with it themselves? How much time do we have? Well, the simple answer, the Bible answer, is that we have exactly the same amount we've always had. Only today. We're going to be talking about this a little bit later on in the show. Stick around.